So welcome to the conversation. Education Secretary Gavin Williamson, who's here to explain. So the exams, next summer's exams timetable is being reworked. In what fashion, Secretary of State? Good morning.
So it's a whole set of measures. Firstly, those are measures that we announced earlier in the year about moving the exam timetable back by 3 weeks, making sure that youngsters had extra time to be in school, changing some of the assessment as to how we do, removing the oral element for language exams and some of the practical elements for some of the science exams. But what we've announced today is going to be having a much more generous approach in terms of grading, mirroring 2020 into 2021 as against the 2019 grade profile, but also giving advance notice to those students so they can really focus their revision on the key topics that really matter, and those subjects such as maths and science, giving sort of exam aids for those students so they can really succeed and do very well.
And this is at both GCSE and A-level, is it, Secretary of State?
It's at both GCSE and A-level.
Right. So, candidly, we're going to tell them the questions. They can take in additional papers. They'll get advance notice. Can I put it to you, can they bring their big sister in too to answer the question? Where does it end, Secretary of State?
Well, Nick, my daughter's facing her GCSEs. So my recommendation would have, if she could bring in a person, would have been to bring in yourself. But that we are going to ban Nick Ferrari from aiding pupils in their GCSEs.
Why don't we just put a line through? Because this, I feel sorry for the youngsters caught up in this. No one could have prepared for the COVID. Let's just not have exams, Secretary of State.
Well, the best form of assessment, and I've discovered this, as some would say, the hard way, Nick, is that the best form of assessment is exams. It isn't teacher-assessed grades. It's not algorithms, you'll be pleased to hear. It's actually, yes, sometimes giving and taking exceptional action in order to be able to give children extra support, but it's about them going into an examination hall, sitting down and taking those exams. And there's lots of people, and I've heard it many, many times, that people say, well, you can't run exams. It won't be possible. We've got a pandemic. Well, I'd say to them, and you'll know this, but there's a lot of people that don't, that over the last 6 weeks, even during a national lockdown, we've been running GCSE exams and we've been running A-level exams, and tens of thousands of students have been sitting those exams, and they've been doing it safely and securely and successfully. And I think if we can run an exam series during a pandemic and a national lockdown, I have every confidence that we're going to be able to run those self-same exams in 2021 in the summer of next year.
Let's move up the age bracket, if we may, and talk a little bit about university students, Secretary of State. That you and obviously chancellors are trying to stagger when the youngsters return to their homes. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we're making sure, so we got students starting to return home sort of from today as part of a travel corridor, making sure they do so securely. But actually, as students return back to university, we'll be asking all students to, when they arrive at university, to have a test, sort of a non-symptomatic test for COVID, but we're going to be staggering that over 5 weeks.
So some students won't get back until February. Would they be entitled to compensation for their fees?
We're not sort of compensating them for fees because they'll still be learning during that time. There'll be a small number of students who will be at the back end. We're prioritising those courses that have large practical elements. So we expect that 40% of students will be returning as you would normally be expecting them to. But we have provided an extra £20 million worth of funding to support those students that are needing some extra help as a consequence of this.
So it will be lessons online, effectively, from their homes for those 4 or 5 weeks. Is that what you're driving at?
Yeah. So in those during that time, they'll be continuing to study. We obviously want to get those students, whether it's medical students or trainee nurses or those who are doing practical engineering subjects, we need to get them back first because they do need that classroom time, absolute priority. But all students will be studying as normal from the start of term.
Just a couple of other things while I have the benefit on the line, Secretary of State.
Of course.
You're such a young man, you probably won't qualify for the vaccination until about 2029, but would you be prepared to have it as and when your time arrives?
Absolutely, and I'd certainly be encouraging everyone else to be having it, and I certainly hope that my loved ones will be also getting the vaccine.
And it would pass your mum's test, as we heard from Jonathan Van Tam a few weeks ago.
Definitely pass my mum's test.
Can you say there will be no further lockdowns, Secretary of State?
I can't see a place where we'll be having another lockdown. The British people are very sensible, very responsible. We recognise that this is a virus that we're still having to deal with, and it's great news that we see the vaccine heading our way. But it is going to take a time to roll out. That's why we've got the tiered restrictions, and if we continue to follow those rules, there'll be no need to be going into another national lockdown, especially with the vaccine heading our way and ever more testing being available.
I mentioned Jonathan Van Tam. He said yesterday that he thought we might be wearing masks or face coverings and using hand sanitizer for many years. The Prime Minister, though, said life will get back to normal. Who's right?
Well, I would always say the Prime Minister.
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't call wearing a face covering all the time normal, or using hand gel every time I walk into a supermarket.
It's a lot of our habits have changed. Now, I do think there'll be some sort of lasting changes in terms of habits, but I think we're all rather craving to get back to normal when it's safe to do so. But the British people at every stage of this pandemic have taken a really responsible, pragmatic approach. It's been so hard on so many families right across the country, but we do want to see this defeated. The vaccine's going to take us to that place where we can.
And lastly, did the fact that Britain is in the process of and has Brexited, did that mean we got the vaccination, a world first, ahead of the US and the EU? Yes or no, do you believe, Secretary of State?
Well, I just reckon we've got the very best people in this country, and we've obviously got the best medical regulators, much better than the French have, much better than the Belgians have, much better than the Americans have. That doesn't surprise me at all, because we're a much better country than every single one of them.
So it did help that we've Brexited finally, Secretary.
I think just being able to get on with things, deliver it, and the brilliant people in our medical regulator making it happen means that people in this country are going to be the first ones in the Western world to get that Pfizer, or in the world to get that Pfizer vaccine. Real competitive advantage. But do you know who it's down to? It's down to those brilliant clinicians in the regulator who's made it happen so fast. Our thanks go out to them, because by doing what they've done, they're going to have saved lives.
If I don't see you prior to, have a Merry Christmas. I think you'll reflect on an interesting year when you're with your family in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so time, I imagine, Secretary of State. Is that a fair summation?
I think that's a very, very fair summation there, Nick.
Gavin Williamson.